paranormal things happening was in that theater, the State Theater in South Bend with Dark Realm. I mean, I've had my own personal experiences, which is outside of filmmaking.
Do you want to talk about it?
Talked about one time. Yeah, it's a good, scary story. So yeah, I mean, I was ill, and I was waiting for some surgery and stuff, and it was an ongoing kind of illness, and it had been going on for a while. And then one night, in the midst of all of this, I was laying in bed with my girlfriend, and then at the foot of the bed, it was late, in the middle of the night, and I saw, what I'm going to label an entity, what I'm going to call an entity, and it looked like, it was kind of floating, flying, floating, levitating at the end of the bed, the foot of the bed, and outstretched arms, a black shroud, and, as the arms went out, to either side, skeletal hands, and then slowly the hood tipped up to reveal a skeletal face. And it seemed to just kind of hover there for the longest time. I couldn't tell you exactly how long it was. I'm sure it felt like a lot more time than it actually was. And it just hovered there. And I was fascinated by it, up to the point to where it started to slowly creep up, where it was, kind of starting to, where we would be facing me soon. We would be, as I looked up, it would be, laying flat across, hovering, looking straight down at me. And as it crept closer and closer, I eventually took a swing at it, and I rolled out of bed onto the floor, and it was gone. It was just, that was it, Never heard anything, never made a sound, and I wasn't on any sort of medication or anything that would, cause one to have an experience or hallucination or anything like that. Never happened before, never happened since, but it certainly looked like the Grim Reaper had come to do something, scare me, warn me, take me, I don't know, but that is my most visceral brush with the supernatural, the paranormal, and whatever that was. I have an open mind to it, but I saw something, and there was no communication, there was no nothing other than the fact that as it got closer, I'd had enough of that and wasn't about to find out what the next part of that experience was going to be. So I took a swing and rolled out of bed, and I woke up my girlfriend and everything. But that's the experience. So I don't know if you heard anybody else explain anything, quite like that. I've heard of things, other stories about like entities floating, at the foot of beds and things like that, but not necessarily in the guise of the Grim Reaper.
Well, I got a funny feeling like I'm going to really burst your bubble here. But yeah. Maybe the Reaper got you, okay? And you passed on. You went to hell, and this is what hell is right now. What you're experiencing.
It's not a bad deal. Then I'm having a good time. So
that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you went to heaven, right, and you could drive you could own a Rolls Royce and have speedboats and have the most beautiful woman in the world and a puppy dog that loved you, and and life just was perfect. And nothing ever happened bad. Would you want that, or would you want a life that was like this for the rest of for eternity? I would take what I am going through in eternity. I wouldn't want the other.
The other, getting everything you want, that's kind of the point of life. We all want to get what we want, to get there. It's all about maximizing the good stuff, minimizing the crap, the bad stuff. And a lot of people say, though, there's a whole construct, a concept that we go back and forth. That it's like it's like Doctor Who, only instead of regenerating, we go back into behind the veil, and then we come back down. We choose to come back down and learn more and experience more for the cosmos, the cosmic, whatever is out there, whoever your concept of your maker is, that it is experiencing itself through us, down here in the flesh. And then we go back when we die, and then we can come back. Like I say, it's like Doctor Who, we're not regenerating, the sonic screwdriver, that concept of same program, different casing.
Okay.
So that's another way to look at it, that we do indeed come back here specifically for the challenges and to learn and to overcome things and to come back down in different, periods of time as it moves forward, and then when the body gives up the ghost, you go back and then decide whether you're coming back for another round of that or not, because and maybe that's exactly why what you just described is that you could go on behind the veil to the afterlife and go, okay, well, it's just all awesome here, and there's a lot of love in the room, but it's boring, so I'm going to go back down and challenge myself to learn something new or finish some old business somehow. And then that happens, and then here we are again. So maybe we've done this all before, Gary. Who knows?
Well, as long as I don't get stuck with my first wife, but again, that could be the hell. Could you imagine being married to the worst woman in the world? Well, I'm sorry, ladies, but I mean, she was not the nicest person in the world. And then you're reincarnated, and you keep going back to the same type of woman over and over again. That would be hell. But I will.
Well, I mean, if it's just a repeat, yeah, nobody likes repeats. I mean, there are certain the good things we want to revisit all the time, but something like that, you wouldn't necessarily want to send yourself back down to that. I remember you telling me the stories of her and the Ouija board parties and all that stuff, and how weird and tenuous that all got, where you had enough at a certain point.
Oh yeah. But reincarnation, I've had a couple guests on who wrote books on it. One is a very famous psychiatrist that's been on my show. And we were talking about like the case with a kid in the UK who was like 5 years old. And he was telling his parents, that he was a fighter pilot for the RAF during World War II.
Yeah.
He mentioned the squadron, people's names. He explained, how the plane caught on fire and how he died. And then, like when he was about 7 years old, it was like he forgot all about it. But there's been so many cases of young kids, like in India. There was a case again of about a 7-year-old boy that went up to his dad and told his dad, "This guy in the village killed me and buried my body over such and such." Well, he kept saying it, and finally his, dad and mom took him to the local police, and, nobody believed it, so he took him to where the boy was supposedly buried. They started digging, and then they found the remains of a little boy that had a huge hole in his head. And one of and it was a small village, and one of the guys, broke down, and because he knew who it was. He mentioned the person's name and everything that killed him because he was still alive. Well, the guy was arrested and, put in prison for murder. And that kid would have not known, it's just things like that is strange, and then what the psychiatrist told me, that with a lot of research, it seems it comes on when they're around 4 or 5 years old and kind of disappears.
Yeah, it's fairly common from what I understand. I was just watching a documentary about one of those kids that remembered all this, and they actually made contact with with who he was in the last life, with their living relatives and things. And and it passed later as he got older, but the kids are remembering. There are many instances of documented cases where kids remember a past life, and that's fascinating to me.
Well, I think that's the whole point. They remember at a certain age, and then, it kind of fades away. But, my daughter, when she was really young, she was into watching Poltergeist and all that stuff, on VH every day for months. She would watch it hours and hours. But then
kids get hooked on certain films, and they do. They just can't get enough of it. They don't get burnt out on it. They just whatever it is they happen to gravitate towards, and they will just consume the same thing endlessly. Yeah.
Well, I got to the point, without her knowing, I went in there and cut the tape, inside the VHS, the case, where she couldn't watch it anymore. I couldn't take it anymore. But what I was getting at, she would sit there and talk to her imaginary friend. And, I used to look at her like, wow, she really has imagination here. But then we had like a couple cats. And it was funny because she'd be sitting there. The cats would be, on the couch, different couches. But they were looking at the direction she was talking, and they were doing expressions and weird things, like they maybe saw something that I couldn't see. And, and again, when she was about 8 years old, 7 years old, it all of a sudden, that all disappeared and went away. But it was funny. I never thought about it till lately. I just remembered how the cats were so intense. All three of them looking at the same thing. It was not there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe there is.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for a lot of that. And all those stories and that experience that so many of them have, where they are open and they can see that and remember past lives and things like that. And then it does. It seems like then they get a little older, about 7, 8, and then it all kind of goes. Those memories fade, and then they get on with the business of this life. But it's fascinating how those kids, I've heard that time and time again, and then, in many documented cases, and it makes me wonder why they don't talk about that more, or why major media hasn't delved into that a little bit more. Whether to prove it or disprove it. But how else would these young kids have those memories? It's not like they can go out and research that kind of thing to that degree, and then be able to talk about it in a way where, it could lead them back to another person who's gone, that past life, and that's what makes, I think, the concept of reincarnation really fascinating. Is that that does seem to leave some residual evidence behind of, maybe it is more of a you go and you're back and you go and you're back, and how much of a choice do you have in that? Is it some sort of cosmic cycle? What is that then, and what drives that? What is that? What's behind that? And what it's fascinating if you have an open mind to something like that. But it would be interesting to see all the data and how psychologists and others explain something like that.
Well, not just that. I also had a ex-detective. He was retired, but he was a major, I think New York police department. He was a detective that, a homicide detective. And, then he retired, and then he always wanted to get into hypnosis, and do past regressions. Because he had nothing else to do. He put his 20 years in. He was young enough yet. And then he started doing that. And, then I asked him when he was on the show, I said, well, did you ever go back and when people were telling you about their past lives, when you had them under, did you ever verify it? And he goes, that was the scary part. That he did. And after he did it on several of them, he quit doing it because it was too scary. But, some of these people would come up with, telling their story, or they'd be under, but they would give their name and how they died or whatever happened, right? And who they were. He went back and he, the ones he could, was new enough to be able to, go back and check. He said that they matched. Everything that the person was telling them matched. The people give them the address, where they lived, how long they lived, the name of relatives, all this stuff, how they died, and all that stuff. And he said it was so eerie that he quit going and investigating afterwards.
See, I would have just kept on going, because if you've got those investigative skills, I would just keep going and write an entire book of case histories on that, to the point where, how's anybody, going to, come to another conclusion? You can draw whatever conclusions you want from that evidence, but if you have a body of evidence and case histories that in a great enough number where you have, a really good sample of these experiences, I think at that point you have to look closer at it. Don't you? I mean, I'm surprised. I mean, I can see where it would